So in my last video, I made two statements that most likely left some people scratching their heads. Birds are technically reptiles, and everything with a backbone is a fish. Now, inevitably, there is someone out there who's saying something along the lines of, "Oh, this science guy done lost his mind, I ain't no fish." So I want to play a little game with you. Define the term fish. Don't just come up with the image of a fish in your head and say that that's a fish, all right? Give a description of a fish that can only be applied to fish and nothing else. What are the key characteristics of them that make them uniquely fish that doesn't exclude anything that would be called a fish, but also excludes everything that isn't a fish? Let's start with the basics on this definition. Any animal that lives exclusively in the water. That's a pretty broad term there, and already it excludes a number of fish. There are several species that we call fish that are amphibious, in that they live both in and out of water for at least some portion of their life. Walking fish, mudskippers, snakeheads, killifish, and lungfish, just to name a few. It also includes things that aren't fish, like mollusks, corals, crustaceans, the larval form of some insects, as well as amphibians and cetaceans. This most basic of classifiers is way too broad and way too narrow at the same time to use to classify fish. And this applies to every other thing that we could use to classify them as well. Scales, well, now we have to include every reptile alongside them, as well as excluding all the fish that don't have scales, like catfish. Gills? Now we include crustaceans and isopods while excluding lungfish. Backbone? Well, that technically includes everything that is a fish, but we also find ourselves having to include every reptile, mammal, and amphibian. The term fish is a social construct. Now, before you get mad and click off this video, just hear me out for the next few minutes. I promise you that this will be an informative experience. A social construct, at its most basic of definitions, is a term that exists not in objective reality, but as a result of human interaction. It exists because humans say it exists. The issue here is that while they are useful for everyday conversation, they aren't useful when trying to explain things in a scientific setting. The terms end up breaking down because they aren't able to classify things in an objective manner. So whereas something like mammal and reptile both have objective definitions to them, the same can't be said about a term like fish. It's either a term that means nothing at all, or that is so incredibly broad that it includes things we don't recognize as fish. This video isn't about social constructs, I just happen to have a massive issue with the term fish. As does science, apparently, which is why it isn't used to refer to any taxonomical or phylogenetic groups. And this is where I'm going to take a dive into what I actually wanted to talk about in this video. Now, see, birds are reptiles, but simply just saying it doesn't really help you understand why that is. There are three types of animals that we would consider land-based creatures. Arthropods, which are insects, arachnids, and isopods, you know, the little roly-poly guys. Amphibians, with your newts, salamanders, frogs, etc. And amniotes. And it's the amniotes which we are focused on here because it's easy to understand why we aren't talking about arthropods, as well as, well, amphibians are just an extension of fish. Okay, we'll do this quickly. Amphibians are all tetrapods that belong to the group Batrachomorpha, and more specifically, amphibia and lissamphibia. They share more in common with fish than they do with amniotes, although they look more similar to amniotes than they do to fish. The biggest thing are their eggs and how they breathe. They don't have protected eggs, and they don't breathe with the use of a ribcage. So if we're looking at where we're going to classify birds, we're going to have to look at amniotes, and this gets us to three more different kinds of classifications that we're going to have to sort through. Bear with me here, there's a lot of terms that are going to be scientific nomenclature and things that alike, alright? They are long, they're wordy, just deal with it. So we have anapsids, synapsids, and diapsids. These three terms you may be familiar with, but most likely through different names, and we'll get to that, but first we should probably cover what they mean. All three of these terms are in reference to the animal's skull, specifically the presence of holes behind the eye sockets or lack thereof. Anapsids have no holes, synapsids have one, and diapsids have two. The current understanding is that there are no extant species of anapsids, but this is an ever-changing debate, so I'm going to go with the most recent information that I could find. This really leaves us with two possible classifications to go with. The opening in the skull has a scientific name. It's called the temporal fenestra. In synapsids, it's actually pretty easy to find so long as you know what you're looking for. If you follow the outline of the eye sockets down to where they meet with the upper jaw muscle, it's right about here. See, all extant species of synapsids are mammals. But at one point in time, this group included more than just mammals. It included things like gorgonopsids and dimetrodon. And because of their close relationship with mammals, these prehistoric creatures are called stem mammals. Clearly, birds aren't mammals, so they have to fall into the category of diapsids then. But by the process of elimination that we've gone through, that would also put reptiles in diapsids. The scientific category that includes all diapsids is Sauropsida, which is the sister clade for Synapsida. Within it are two major splits, Lepidosauromorpha and Archosauromorpha. Everything that exists within these two groups is classified as a reptile, as they are the two sister groups within Sauria or Reptilia, depending on which name you want to use. Lepidosaurs only have two extant groups within them, which are the squamates, which are all the snakes and lizards, and the Rhynchocephalia, which only has tuatara in it. If you've never seen a tuatara, they look very similar to lizards, and so you'll understand exactly why they are together. Archosauromorpha contains testudens, which are all the turtles, and it also includes archosaurs, which are crocodiles and birds. Well, that was quite a long-winded way to go about this, but it should have been enlightening at least a little bit. So why did you go on that rant about fish in the beginning? Truth be told, I probably could have done this video without that, but there is an interesting bit about that rant that coincides with our classification of amniotes. See, anapsid is a term that really started to fall out of favor when making classification of animals. A number of creatures that were previously recognized as members of this group were originally put there either when we didn't have complete skulls, or because they were part of a classification that had already been put there. And turtles are often moved in and out of this group because they don't have any temporal fenestra. But the genetic evidence says that they are much closer related to diapsids and other reptiles than they are to anything that would be classified as an anapsid. At this time, it's unclear if the earliest of amniotes had temporal fenestra or not. In most of the readings that I could find, it seems more like the anapsid condition is one that was inherited from earlier tetrapods, like amphibians, rather than something unique to amniotes, making it an unnecessary classification tool. As we march forward into our discoveries, it's becoming less and less clear as to whether something should be classified as an anapsid, or if it's a term that's outdated and exists purely because we say it does. Hey, if you found this video useful or helpful in any form or fashion, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and hit the like while you're at it. You know, maybe you could share this out to your family and friends and see if they can come up with a halfway decent definition for fish that only includes fish. You know, it's a pretty difficult one. As we move forward into 2023 here, I plan on putting out some more videos than I had for the last couple of months. Hopefully we'll be getting to 2 videos within a month, and yeah, it's gonna be exciting. So yeah, stick around. Maybe you'll see something else. Until next time.